And welcome to another edition of this Aggie Sports Zoom Hangout. I'm Travis Brown at the Eagle. Also on here with Eagle Crew, it's Robert Cessna, sports editor here at the Eagle, and Alex Miller, our all things digital guy, here to talk a little bit of Aggies. It's been a couple of weeks since we've seen a game from the Aggies, and so we thought we'd break it down. It's a nice little halfway point in the season to hear what we had to say and what we've seen from the Aggies this year. So let's start off with this, a nice, easy softball to get into the flow of things. What has surprised you most about this A&M team this year? Cease, what do you think?
I'm thinking I'd be the offensive line. The fact is that we expected the defensive line to be good, but the fact is that A&M's able to run the ball, pass blocking, haven't given up a sack in five games. It's hard also not to, in that same breath, talk about the improvement by Kellen Mond, but I don't think Kellen Mond would be where he's at today without the offensive line. So the offensive line, to me, went from where I thought they should have gotten the low 60s last year most times in the big games. They failed time after time to where now they're you right off the Vanderbilt game, I think that was a bad game plan. So you can really say they even had over 400 yards against Alabama. It all goes back to the offensive line. So I give them 5 stars right off the bat over anybody else.
Alex, what do you think?
How about the wide receivers? Losing Osmond, losing Buckley. I mean, those were your 2 veterans right out the gate, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. And then Caleb Chapman emerges, and then he goes down with the knee injury. Hez Jones has come back. He's kind of made an instant impact. Anias Smith, he's kind of moved back to that slot receiver position. Chase Lane has had kind of a sneaky good year, and Kellen's just kind of had weapons that he's thrown to, and these are guys that coming into the year, they were not proven commodities. He had Weidemeyer, people knew about him, but kind of those outside downfield threats and just the emergence of Chase Lane and then getting Hez Jones back, especially with Chapman going down, has been huge for A&M. We hear this week that Cam Brown enters the transfer portal. He started 4 games earlier this year. So, I mean, not a guy that you want to lose from a depth perspective, but, they've had guys been able to step up. And I think that's really allowed the offense to take a next step. Kellen's made some downfield throws. That was something we hadn't seen the last 2 years. And so having that added element to the offense has really allowed A&M to make some good strides on that side of the ball.
I think both of y'all presented pretty much what I would say too. If you look at the SEC StatCat website, Kellen Mond has the lowest amount of sacks in the country, or excuse me, in the SEC, tied with 3 or 4 other guys at 2. And he's 9th in the team in pressure percentage and percentage of passes that he's under pressure at about 21% this season, which is both indicative of the offensive line and then what Mond's been able to do to make his reads, get the ball out quickly, and do everything in that regard. So here's the next question. That's kind of what's been going good and some of the reasons why A&M has been able to have some of this momentum going into these last couple of weeks, but everything halted. Contact tracing within the team put everything on hiatus for 2 weeks. Only a limited group of players have been able to practice, and the ones who are quarantined have just been able to do some workouts. Is this a momentum killer, or is there positives that can be taken from this little break in play, Cease?
Well, we're never going to not know until they get back on the field. We saw Florida come back without really missing a beat. We saw Wisconsin miss several games and come out and just destroy Michigan. If there's one guy you would think that would have this team ready, it would be Jimbo. But I will say, as a betting man, I would think the negatives outweigh the positives just because it's hard to talk about a team that's not playing. I'm sitting here at the office, and I just feel like I haven't seen A&M play in a month, even though it hasn't been that long. When you're not on the edge, fans want to be talking about the team all the time. What I love about football is it takes 3.5 hours to play. And if we're driving back from Mississippi, we spend 12 hours dissecting the game. We come back, we write about it, we preview the next game. All we do is talk Aggie football, basically, with our friends, with our coworkers, just hashing the last game, looking forward to the next game. Well, why would we even talk about South Carolina other than Will Muschamp being fired? We don't really want to talk much about LSU. Heck, they might not play LSU because you just never know about the COVID. So I think that's a big negative just because we're not talking about A&M football. I expect A&M, whoever they play, I like the way the schedule comes. If they come back and play LSU, I think they're going to come back. But what do you lose when you're not, so to speak, in the limelight? I can't answer that. I just know we're not talking about A&M football. Even though we're having this podcast right now, we're really not living and dying A&M football, which you should for a fifth-ranked team in the country.
I think that if there is a positive, it's got to be the fact that they came out of that South Carolina game a little bit more banged up than they had been most of the season. You have Isaiah Spiller and a running back, their bell cow running back who has really made this offense go, has left the last 3 games a little bit banged up early, and Jimbo's held him out for precautionary reasons, saying he would have been able to good to go. But it seemed like each week he was leaving the game a little bit earlier each time with some kind of little bump or bruise. And you got to think that 2 weeks off has been able to help rest and recover. You also had Jared Hawker, who came out of the last game, needed to get a little recovered, gets a couple more weeks that if Michael Clemens would be able to come back towards the end of the season, he might be able to catch those last 2 games now. So I think if there is a positive take from it, it is a team that probably needed a little bit of rest from the injury standpoint. Alex, what do you think?
No, I'm right. That's what I was going to say, Travis. I mean, you think about Spiller, he's left early each of the last 3 games, I think. You know, at the points that he left, A&M had the game in hand. The Aggies weren't in doubt of losing, but, you know, having those 2 weeks to just recover your body, and, you know, it's a 10-game SEC slate. And yes, A&M should be favored in these last 4 games, but having a recovered Isaiah Spiller, and then having 2 weeks, we saw Devon Achane come in against South Carolina, and he was great for A&M. I mean, giving him 2 weeks of practice to be like, hey, you've done these things well. Here's how you can get just a little better. Thinking about a guy like him, or maybe up front on the offensive line, Layden Robinson, who came in for Jared Hawker. He had a pretty solid night in the second half on that offensive line at right guard. And so developing that depth, think about receiver, you lose Cam Brown potentially, getting guys like maybe a Damon Demas or Jalen Preston, a guy that's been around for a while. You get some of that depth back, and then, you know, you don't have to play Ole Miss not practicing 2 weeks. Ole Miss is a dangerous team that could have had loss written all over it for an A&M team they're trying to find some way into the playoff. They need a lot of help, but not having to play a dangerous Ole Miss team coming off of COVID, that's definitely probably a blessing for the Aggies.
Let's take this moment real quick to, if you're watching this on Facebook Live or on Periscope, thank you. If you're watching it live, be sure to fire in any questions or comments and join the conversation however you will. Our man Alex is keeping an eye on that, and he'll fire those questions and comments and thoughts in as we get going and continue on this. Cease, I know we've had a couple weeks, like you said, to really, really percolate on that last A&M win and where they are. What's been picking at your brain? What have you been marinating on over these off weeks for the Aggies?
Well, once again, it's hard not to look at the big picture with the college football playoff coming out on Tuesday night. Now, one thing that is good is getting back to, it was kind of surprising when you look back and where it was at 16, they came in 4th. All of a sudden, 2 days before, you start looking at the equation, you go, maybe you could get that 4th. They were only like 7th in the polls or what have you. And you start looking and you go, well, maybe A&M can get there. And of course, A&M did get there, didn't last there long. I think they're going to last a lot longer, maybe on the outside looking in, real close on the outside looking in. So I think that's going to be a good time. That's why if A&M can get back on the field next Saturday, not miss a beat, hopefully, against LSU, be number 5 in the poll, number 6, wherever the College Football Playoff Committee has them. I think that'll be a big charge. That'll get a big charge back in this team. And you guys talked about the rest. Yeah, I think the rest does matter, but I just think they need to get out there and keep that express rolling, because that South Carolina game was one of the more complete games I've seen from this team in the last few years. You might have to go back to the Johnny era, and just all phases working real well. And now Smith's only going to get better returning punts. I thought he'd return a punt for a touchdown sometime this year. Still could. There's 3 or 4 games left, depending on what COVID thinks. But there's just a lot of things that A&M could get better at, but I don't think you can get better without playing. So it'll be interesting to see, do they play 2, 3 games, 4 games? And, do they get to that number 4 spot or higher? But, those are nice things to debate about, that we didn't have to worry about the last 4 years. And it's not a worry. It's actually, to me, a bonus when you're covering a team that you can say, well, they might make the top 4.
Yeah, in that same vein, it's going to be interesting to me. I know today on the SEC teleconference, a reporter asked Jimbo about how much he's going to pay attention to next Tuesday's first release of the college football playoff poll, top 25, and how much he pays attention to those and he said they don't look at him until the season's ended, and that's when he'll start campaigning for his team to maybe get into the playoff. But for me, and I agree that for the most part, most people can say those Tuesday night releases each week are a little bit more made for TV than actually serve much of a purpose until the end of the season. But this season's a little bit of a different case. And I know last year I served on that mock college football playoff committee. Alex, you did it the year prior. So we had a little bit of an inside knowledge on how that whole system works. And I don't know about how yours worked, Alex, back 2 years or 3 years ago, but the 2 things that were talked about most heavily really were strength of schedules and non-conference games, who played who outside of conference, and then the eye test. How does this stat match up with this stat on this team? Could this offensive line beat this defensive line from what you've seen on film and in the games? And a lot of debate on that. Well, that whole first aspect of that has been taken away for the most part, especially in the SEC, because there were no non-conference games. So it's going to be a lot more eye test this year, a lot more. Well, I think this wide receiver core could beat this defensive back core. I think this defense is a little bit better than this offense. That human aspect of it is going to play a lot heavier into this, in my opinion. I'm interested to see where A&M stacks up in this first ranking with the committee, because it is so much eye test. If A&M finds themselves behind a Florida, if they find themselves behind a Cincinnati, that means that A&M's best body of work that they're probably going to have in this first half of the season doesn't match up the eye test against a Florida or a Cincinnati. And it's going to be a much tougher road to hoe for the Aggies than if they kind of come in a little bit higher than those 2, because they'll have passed that eye test a little bit more from the committee. What do y'all, Alex? I'll let you jump in on that next, because you were able to kind of to weigh in on that and be a part of that committee. And what's your take on that first ranking and maybe the importance this year as opposed to others?
I'm right there with you, Travis. I'm curious to see where A&M's placed. 2 things that I remember that really the committee emphasized too is winning conference championships in head-to-head matchups. And clearly the discussion is A&M going to be ranked ahead of Florida? And as we know, the Aggies beat Florida. They won by 3 points. They won at home. Cease, I know you say it all the time. You always give the home team 3 points. Well, A&M won by 3. Kyle Trask, he looks like he's a potential Heisman favorite right now. Florida, they've won 10 games the last 2 seasons. Florida is the established power. A&M is the up-and-comer. Yes, Florida is also trying to get over the hump, but they've been in that kind of conversation the last couple of years. A&M has not. And, they go on the road, or they beat Georgia down in Jacksonville. And so Florida's got a chance to win that championship. But I am really curious to see how the committee values that win over Florida. Obviously, the AP voters, enough of them have said A&M is better than Florida because of that. Cease, I know you're one of them. But in the coaches poll, Florida is ranked ahead of A&M. So
by 1 point.
By 1 point. And at the end of the day, the college football playoff rankings is the only poll that really matters in the end all be all. And so I'm curious how that shakes out. I'm also curious to see where they place Cincinnati and BYU. It seems like if there is going to be a year that a group of 5 team finally breaks through to the playoff, it could be this year. I mean, you think about BYU, they're going to play 12 games. The Pac 12 today said that their schools can play a non conference game. Does any Pac 12 school dare play BYU? And if you're BYU, if you think about Travis, what you said about the non conference games, you're licking your chops trying to play one of those Pac 12 teams, proving that you're not just some random group of 5 team that can just beat up on a bunch of small schools. You can go and play the big dogs and win. And you think about Cincinnati, Cincinnati's a very strong team. They play in the American, that conference that kind of touts itself as the P6 per se. But they've been winning games very handedly. And so, yeah, I'm really curious to see where A&M is compared to Florida and particularly Cincinnati and BYU.
I'm interested. I want to see where the highest ranked Pac-12 team is going to be. I think A&M is ahead of Florida because A&M beat Florida. I think the committee, you're right, goes head on and head on. I think they will put A&M above Florida because Florida's got a direct path. All they got to do is win the SEC championship game. So if A&M's ranked behind Florida, you can say, well, they'll still lose to Alabama. But I think that would be bad for the committee to have somebody ahead of somebody, both with the same amount of losses and the other team beat them. So I'd bet a Coke that A&M's ahead of Florida. I want to see where the highest ranked Pac-12 team is, because if, let's say, Oregon goes 5-0 and 6-0, that's the only games they play. The committee has always said they put a lot of emphasis on winning conference. Well, the Pac-12 has been shut out of the college football playoff the last few years. Would a 6-0 Oregon team get over, like, say, an 8-1 or 9-1 A&M team? I think that could be a dicey proposition for the committee. What I don't like about the committee is when they announce on Tuesday or any night, they don't put a power rating. They just put this team 6th, 4th, 5th, and 6th. And then suddenly we've seen Ohio State jump somebody or Alabama jump somebody. Suddenly you can be 6th all along going into that last game, and suddenly you're 4 and you don't know if they were 1 point behind, 2 points, because eye test does matter. So we're talking about eye tests. I want to see where the highest ranked Pac-12 team is, because I think that's a team that could sneak in, and the committee just says, oh, we're not going to put any conference into, even though I do believe if Notre Dame only loses 1 game the rest of the way out against Clemson and Clemson goes 1 loss, boy, it's going to be hard for A&M to get a bid over a 1-loss Notre Dame or a 1-loss Clemson team. Or this time be a 1-loss Notre Dame team, because Clemson will win the ACC. But I think that would be dicey. And Alex, you mentioned Cincinnati and BYU. If they run the table, I'm telling you what, if all those scenarios that happen, there's going to be a lot more white hair on those committee members other than RC's white hair.
Yeah.
Well, he'll be recused from the room.
Just for A&M, though.
You're right.
It's true.
Yeah.
So we move on. A&M's going to play LSU at home next time they return to the field.
We hope.
Yes, you're exactly. LSU's not been good this year. It's been one of the biggest turnarounds from a national championship team historically, as many have documented. Does A&M's absence from the practice field for 2 weeks and then bringing it back in there raise any concerns against what has kind of become one of A&M's rivals, or should this be a nice little tune-up game to get back into the swing of things?
I just think it's going to be, that's a perfect game for A&M. A&M would be up. They're playing LSU. LSU will be down. Even if they beat Arkansas, what's LSU playing for? They've been in the news ever since really walking off the field last year about how many guys are going to get drafted, lose 17, all these. They want a lot of news off the field, not now all good because of what else is happening. I don't know how LSU can concentrate on playing football. This has just been a bad year for them. A&M's got a lot to play for. I think, yeah, LSU might, A&M's still not LSU's rival. I don't care what happened here a couple of years ago. A&M's going to remember last year and all those players that put that 50-7 beating or whatever are not there. But A&M, I think A&M would beat LSU by 21 points or more if they play next Saturday. And I think it's a perfect situation for A&M to come back, LSU in front of 130,000 people, and they'll do great.
I'm with Cease. I think it's a great game for A&M to get back in. LSU is not that good. Miles Brennan, it doesn't look hopeful that he's going to come back. It's still up in the air. So they're rolling with a freshman quarterback likely. Their defense has just been abysmal all season. And Cease said it. I mean, you got to think that those A&M players remember the butt whooping they got last year out in Baton Rouge. I mean, 50-7, that's something that sticks with you. And so you got to think that there's going to be some fire in A&M to go back and serve some revenge as LSU did last year for that 7 overtime loss. So yeah, I think this is a good game for A&M to come back with.
So what assuming the schedule plays out like it's supposed to, what is the game you have circled most on A&M's remaining schedule that could be the one to trip them up? For me, it's Auburn. I'll let y'all pick and expound on it a little bit more.
I like Ole Miss only because I think Auburn's going to get beat up by Alabama. I think if that game, and they've talked about possibly moving games, I think they'd want to keep the Auburn A&M game on the 5th for A&M's sake. Auburn be coming off that loss, get beat up. You don't want to move them back 1 week or 2 weeks to overcome that. And, you might be right, Travis. They play on the 12th or 19th and scheduled around. So it's Auburn. I think that'd be very tough to go down and play your 9th or 10th game at Auburn. But I think the way it's set up right now, I'm worried about Ole Miss only because they can score points. Suddenly, if Lane Kiffin come in here, I wouldn't be surprised if they score 6 times. You do 6 onside kicks. You only might have to recover 2 of those, and then you score 1 more touchdown, and you get in a scoring. And I think A&M is 14 points better than Ole Miss, but you start getting a little bit of pressure. They might be number 5 by then still, or number 4 in a couple weeks in a row. The pressure of having that small number on your back, I think, plays into it. So even though it's at home, I would vote for Ole Miss just because I worry about Kiffin's offense will put points on the board.
If you want to look at point breakdowns for SEC teams this year, according this is from SEC StatCat, points per drive, Alabama's at top with 4, Florida's next at 3.82, and then third, Ole Miss, 3.22 points per play. Again, same order. Ole Miss 0.15 points per play. A&M's finishing 4th behind Ole Miss in just about all these categories. Points per game, Ole Miss is 3rd. A&M is 5th in that category. It's a team, like you said, it's an offense that will put points on the board. A&M has a strong defense and has shown that they can win in a little bit of a shootout, but they've also shown at times that they have some self-inflicted wounds early in the season. Anaya Smith drop 4th down catch is something that kind of comes into mind. The missed opportunity at points in the first half of the the Florida game where they had a personnel issue that ended up having to kick a field goal instead of, in a game like that, 4 or 5 points could spell the difference, or 1 score, 1 drop pass. That is something and with this little bit of break, are they going to have to get their timing back? It's something that I'm kind of watching out for as well. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, the Ole Miss game is obviously tricky. Kiffin, great coach. They've got explosive guys. Elijah Moore is having an incredible season at wide receiver. And, kind of the one weak link left in the A&M defense is the secondary. And so you get that guy over the top. You saw what he did last week. Kiffin throwing the clipboard up into the stands, guys wide open. And so you got to think that one. But Auburn too, that's such a tough one. A&M's lost 3 straight against Auburn. Kellen has never played well against Auburn. You think about the game 2 years ago, they had the lead, they blew it. And Gus Malzahn always seems to win one that he shouldn't, and especially when his seat's a little warm. And you got to think that after a loss to Alabama, likely that that is a good situation for Auburn to go in and do what Auburn does and win a game they probably shouldn't. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Cease, any last football thoughts for the day that have been bounced around in your brain as we've been away from football for a week and a half now?
No, it's just strange situation for writers, players, coaches, what have you. But getting back to what everyone said is, I didn't know if we'd see 6 games, let alone see what's out there. So I really, at this point, consider the whole season a plus. And if they get to a situation where there's 2 semifinal games in the championship, no matter who gets picked or when they play, I think it'll be a success. Now, I do think they'll try to get the season over with and not drag out. So I think for that eye test that we started talking about at the start, I think that's going to be big. And right now, A&M passes the eye test in a lot of ways. They just need to continue to do that. And once again, I think Aggies feel a lot more comfortable with Fisher in charge than they did 4 years ago when they came in number 4. And it's just, Jimbo's been there before. He's been to a lot of New Year's Six Bowls. He's won a national championship. So, man, you just can't beat that experience to having that guy, leading the program right now.
Steve, I want to pick your brain about 2 things that are relevant to right now before we go. First, football related, and one tangentially football related. First, having been a sports writer here in Texas, you've been, and then covering an SEC team, you've been pretty keyed in on the career of Will Muschamp, who of course got fired from Florida South Carolina in this last week. What are your thoughts about his career path and how he was kind of going to be the golden boy in Texas and to where he kind of currently sits now?
Well, we see it all the time is you see these guys and you go, man, that guy can't miss. And I really thought Muschamp, just around him in the SEC media days, talking to the guys that I know, he's really seems like a great guy to cover, pretty straightforward. And I think he's a perfect example. He's just made to be a defensive coordinator. I think what happened is you put him in a head coach, even in a place like Florida, and you can say you give all the weapons and recruit, but suddenly he's got to be the PR guy. He's got to do all those things that a guy like Mullen and Urban Meyer are pretty good at, but yet they still, delegate, and Mullen runs the offense. Muschamp can't do all that. Muschamp can't be the defensive coordinator a la while he's the head coach. We saw, Alex just talked about the guy running wide open, Moore running wide open. That would never happen if Muschamp was just the defensive coordinator, but he's wearing too many hats. He can't wear that many hats. And who knows if Mike Elko, if A&M goes 9-1 or 10-1, Mike Elko might get out of here. He might get a good head coaching job. Who knows? Will Muschamp could be defensive coordinator at A&M next year. I just think wherever he's going to land, he's going to be a great defensive coordinator, and he needs to give up being a head coach. And that way, just sit around and have a beer with the sports writers on Zoom and have a good time.
Yeah, I agree about that is something to watch out with if Elko does bail out and get a head coaching job here. That Muschamp and Jimbo are buddies. Let's close it on this. Today is the 21st anniversary of the bonfire tragedy, and then the bonfire game in 1999 that claimed the life of 12 people who were working on the bonfire. Of course, every year Aggieland comes out to remember that tragedy, as they did last night. Cease, you were here covering through all of that. I know we did a lot of coverage on this last year on the 20th anniversary, but it always is a good reminder each year. What do you remember about covering the tragedy, being around here in Bryan College Station when the stat collapsed, and then your remembrances about the game that followed as well, which was is one that's kind of lived in A&M legend since?
Yeah, I was actually still at the office working, which you guys around me, not that unusual, staying up real late at night. When I was younger, I even stayed longer, and to find out that, suddenly something's happening in our town at that time when it's usually pretty quiet, that then, I don't know at that point what's happening. And then by the next day, find out, the bonfire collapsed. And I think about, going out and watching bonfire. And you think about when Jackie Sherrill, how he came in and became so involved in that. Think about all the deals. And then you get back to, you go out to that game, and it's something you'll never forget, just the way when, just the way the crowd was walking in, so solemn, and just everything, connected with that. It was once again a reminder, and we've had a lot of these times this year that it's more than football, but yet football is part of life, and athletics helps Sue so much. And it's the bond we all have, whether we're, Republican, a Democrat, or what have you, and a Christian or non-Christian. And you see things like that, and then you go, we all need to work together, whether you're an Aggie, with your Longhorn. And you think about how the Aggies and Longhorns came together. And, I really believe that ever since then, I think the Aggies and Longhorns, they still are rivals, but I think that helped draw them even closer together and being better people. And I just think anybody that was around there and remembers that, they're a better person because of, how much life matters when something like that happens.
Yeah, that's curious, because I actually have never picked your brain about this. And so you were in the office when the actual stat collapsed. I don't guess you
There was
probably
like nobody there. I was just working by myself at that time,
Right, and there's no
I didn't know what was going on. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
There's no Twitter or cell phones or anything. So you actually you were just down the road and out. You didn't find out about it till the next day.
I didn't know what happened, at that point. I just, I went home at some point, it's like I always do, and say, well, something's happening. But, in sports, you never think of something like that's going to happen.
Right. Of course. Well, thanks for giving those memories, and thanks for everyone for watching. Hopefully we'll be back with our normal kind of Zoom format with someone from LSU to help preview that game, because we'll be back playing football. So for Robert Cessna and Alex Miller and Travis Brown, thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.